Okay, this is Sam, Really Love Guitars. Trying out this thing again, which I've had for ages, but what I'm trying to do is just rebalance the signal to noise ratio. It's one of the downsides of living close proximity to others, but it's very difficult to keep the videos that I do free of lots of noise. Anyway, so nice thing about this, of course, is I can go all the way out here and talk to you and then come back in. It still sounds the same. So I think I've got a balance of the right kind of volume. Now, I wanted to do another quick video, and when I say quick, I mean 5-10 minutes or whatever. And this was prompted by Marco Celestino, and I finally made a note of the question he asked me, because I think I said to him in a YouTube comment that I would do a quick video on it, and then promptly didn't, so apologies for that, Marco. So here we go. Let me just move this out of the way. I've got some pens here in case I need them. Right, so the question that Marco raised was that he said he keeps taking his guitar to local luthiers and techs, and each time they set up his guitar, he says that it comes back to him with a dead straight neck, which of course feels very easy to play, but he says sounds like shit. Now, whether that sounds like or feels like I'm not quite sure. I didn't go into a lot of detail, but I guess the issue that was raised here, the question he asks is, what is it with neck relief? Do you need to have curvature in your neck, or don't you? And it's interesting that, as with all things guitar, probably like everyone else, I've heard loads of different versions of what's supposed to happen. So it doesn't seem to be easy to find some sort of chapter and verse on this issue. So the question is, what are we talking about? What is this neck relief thing? And I guess I don't follow any dogma, and I haven't read many books and so on and so on. I just have assimilate what I read and hear online or in whatever books I have read, and then also kind of make sense of it through experience. So having set up 200 or more guitars in the last couple of years, it's really handy to have a chance to look and see what happens when you bend the neck, and how does it play and how doesn't it play. And I find that's much more effective than I suppose reading it or taking it from somebody else's assertion. So I guess the thing to point out or have a look at is that, and do forgive me if I'm saying obvious stuff that whoever is listening knows all about. I'm just looking for an Allen key here. Okay, so inside your neck, in old-fashioned guitars like this one, there's a neck made of wood and a fingerboard on top of some strips of wood. In this case, you can see it's made of 3 different bits of wood to give it as much stiffness as possible. And on top of that is a rosewood fingerboard onto which the frets are put. And when this thing is under a load from strings, it's actually a lot of poundage, and I always forget how much it is, but it's a surprising amount of weight or force pulling on the neck. Now, over time, when you don't have any metal reinforcing your neck, what happens is the strings will warp the neck, and it will bend it into a curve because there's so much tension. The neck is organic and flexible. It's made of wood, not titanium or carbon fibre, so it will eventually bend. And I suppose people realise that after a while, and so in the 50s or something started advertising steel reinforced necks, and they used to be a sort of I think it was just a steel bar down the middle of the neck, which was there to stiffen it, a bit like in concrete you find metal wire, steel wire to stiffen it. And then the next step on from that was to replace the steel strip or whatever it was with this thing known as a truss rod, which there's lots of different designs, but in essence a truss rod is a composite piece of metal. So here you have a rod and a bar that's welded to either end of the rod, but one end of the rod can be shortened by turning this, and so you can push this end of the bar inwards towards that end. Now, because you're effectively shortening the rod by using the screw device, but the bar can't shorten, all it can do is deform, which it does by bending away from the rod. That's right, yeah. So if I give you an example, I don't know if you can see it very well, but looking down here, it's probably roughly about straight. But if I crank the thing quite hard, I don't know how well you can see that, but that immediately goes into quite a pronounced curve. All right. So that's the function of the truss rod. And older style truss rods like this only do it in one direction. You either slack it off, and it just becomes straight again, or close to straight, and you crank it under pressure and it deforms and becomes curved. So for early guitars, putting one of those into the neck was pretty useful, because you could set it in such a way, in this case, that the bar part would be facing upwards. So if the neck bent that way, or whichever, anyway, so if the neck bent that way, the curvature of the bar would bend it, or counteract that bending or the pull of the strings, and flatten it out. So it gave you control, and it also meant that you could basically set it wherever you want. You could have the neck shaped pretty much how you want, as a sort of composite of balancing the bend induced by the strings and the counter bend induced by the truss rod. Now, that's all cool, and most guitars now have truss rods in them. This one is accessible down at the body end, which is an absolute pain in the arse arrangement, because it means you can't adjust it under load. You have to slack off the strings, clamp them, take the neck off, take the pick guard off, adjust the thing to a guesswork amount, put it back on, load it all up, and see if it's done what you want. Far more sensible, by all means, is on an electric guitar, is the one that adjusts at the end like this. And if you have one that adjusts like that, then you can always adjust it under tension to get the playing action you want. So what people do, this is where it now comes to how do you set it? Given that you can counteract the string pull and do what you want, how do you set it? And you see online people talking about this. Oh, this guitar has got a dead straight neck, and you look down it and it is absolutely flat as a pancake. You can do that, and I suppose if I go switch this around and we look at the whiteboard of slightly doom, if you just, let's say you set your neck completely flat, that's not a very good thing, and then down here's your bridge, down here's your nut, right? So with your neck set exactly flat, you're basically relying on the gradient between the nut and the bridge to give you clearance, so that your strings don't bash into all of the frets. Okay, now obviously if you lower that action there and you lower that action there too much, what you're going to get before long is just, it's not very good. I can't draw straight lines on here, but your strings will eventually, if they don't hit the frets, then they'll be so close to them that when you hit the strings, they're going to hit the frets pretty quickly and rattle one way or another. So what's wrong with having a dead straight neck? Well, I'll give you a sort of, I've done this before and hope it's not obvious. No, hope it's not too patronisingly obvious. If I show you an example, the way I describe it, it's really simple, but I suppose it's quite a nice practical way of visualising it. And we all know this. You remember when you were at school and the girls, or the boys, whatever, used to play the skipping rope thing, and you'd stand, it's great fun actually, you'd stand at one end of the skipping rope and somebody'd stand at the other, and you'd spin it like that, and you get it going really fast, and then maybe somebody would jump over in the middle, and you'd sort of try, they didn't jump fast enough, and you'd whack the backs of their ankles or their calves, and that was the fun bit. And then the tighter you pulled it, the harder it was to achieve the same big curve in the middle. But when it was quite loose, you could get a really big curve. Now, what you knew was you didn't have to move your hands much, and the movement at the far ends was tiny, but the resultant movement in the middle was huge, and it was a big circle the middle of the string would, or the rope would describe that big circle. Now if you think about that translated back to your guitar, let's imagine again, same sort of thing, your guitar as your nut at one end, your bridge at the other, and let's just say you've got a flat neck and body, whatever, and let's say you're the kids, you are those kids starting to spin the rope. Okay, so there's the rope, right, and you have a reasonably low action, you don't want a mile high action, so it's hard to play. So you've got your action, which is how tall you are. There you are, a little kid in the playground, and you start spinning the rope, or somebody comes down and hits the string with a plectrum, right? Doing. Now what happens is, just like with the old skipping rope thing, your string, there's the center point, remember, where it was the taut center point. What will happen is your rope will describe a circle around that center point, which are kind of like two cones put together. Yeah, you remember that when you were spinning it like that. So you can see straight away what the problem is. You're in danger of hitting the ground, and that would be the same if you were doing the skipping rope thing and both of you held your hands right down to the ground. You hit the ground. So to do the skipping rope thing, you have to hold the rope up high enough, and if you remember as a kid, you used to hold it up somewhere kind of near your chest or something to get it really going. And the bigger the circle, the higher it has to be off the ground. Now the truth is, to make that work, you either stand on boxes, or, and this is something you couldn't do when you were a kid, unless you were a star of Inception. If you were a kid and you could change the ground, then you could do it over a riverbed, and actually you could do it quite low down, and you wouldn't have to lift your hands up in the air. You could get a really big swing going. And in a sense, that's what you are doing when you pluck the string when you're playing the guitar. It's obviously exaggerated, and this represents a little bit of curvature in your neck to give you some clearance. Now if it's just flat, you'll see that thing spins in a kind of circular motion. Actually it doesn't look like a circle. When you hit it, it'll look like it's doing that, but it's doing that and that. So any point describes the circle. It's going side to side and backwards and forwards, but it will eventually, in total, describes that circle. So that's why your guitar ideally needs a little bit of relief in the neck, curvature. And I think what Marco's describing is possibly somebody has set, got a bit of goo stuck there. Somebody who has set up his guitar may be a kind of fan of the flat neck school, in which case you can play it, it will play, but it will ideally require a higher action, so that if you have a totally flat neck, if you come back down to the kinds of actions that most people seem to want, which is a low action at the nut and a decent low action near the bridge, to play that kind of action you then also need a slight curvature in the neck. Otherwise, at that low action, it's like putting your hands down on the ground and trying to spin that rope. You will hit the floor, and I think that's what Marco's talking about. It's easy to play because it's straight and flat, but it sounds like shit because it's hitting the frets when you hit it hard. So I think there also might be something that also possibly tends to encourage people to do it flat as well, and that is one of the let me just find the thing. One of the things that luthiers, guitar people learn early on is that you need to at some point you need to level frets, because one of the obstacles to a nice low action is randomly uneven frets, or one high one sticking out here and a high one there. Those things, when you get down to low actions or the kinds of action you want, those things very definitely get in the way. It's a bit like the ground sticking up, a stone in the middle of that riverbed or on the flat playground. You've got a big stone sticking up, you're going to hit it. And that's basically what your high fret is doing. So there's always a case for leveling frets, and a lot of luthiers do it using a sanding beam. I've made one up here using obviously a relatively inexpensive spirit level. But you can buy things that look like this, which are really nice flat chunks of steel on a piece of hardwood. And the idea is because they're nice and flat, you can level a bunch of frets relative to each other. And of course, to do that with one of these two tools, you are obliged to level your guitar neck and flatten it out. And so any luthier who's going to level your frets, typically, unless it's me and a few other people, but typically will adjust the truss rod. Pain in the butt on this guitar, like I said, but on a decent ordinary guitar, you'll adjust the truss rod until, under neutral sort of gravity conditions, you've got a level fingerboard. All right, and then you kind of stop there and you go, right, my neck, using a notched ruler, my neck is level. Then once you're convinced your neck is level, you can get out your leveling beam, your fret leveling file, or if you want to, you can get your radius block with sandpaper on it, and you can go and level your frets. Right, that's great, and a lot of people do it that way, and I have to say, doing it that way is 95% better and more effective than not doing it at all. So you get a really good overall result. You find that your frets will be much more level. You can get a much better playing action. But I guess in some cases, people having done that may be tempted to leave the neck flat as they lower the action, get ready to make it play. And what I would recommend is you need to put in a certain amount of neck relief back into it. If you are going to level your frets using a passively flattened neck, you want to curve your neck again, thinking skipping rope, okay? And when you're playing, you're thinking you need some space in the middle, and you can see it just visually. Look, hardly moves there, big blur there, right? And it's going round and round. It's not, I mean, I can make it go side to side, but it's also going up and down as well. I can't control what happens to it. So to put some curvature back in, obviously you can crank the truss rod counterclockwise, slacken off the effect of the truss rod to allow the strings to load the neck. Now some old necks are so stiff that they just don't respond at all, in which case you're stuck, you don't have any relief. And occasionally I'll get one like that where the only thing you can possibly do is to put a heavier grade of strings on and hope that they will pull the neck into a bit of relief. If that doesn't happen, occasionally I have a guitar that I have to accept will have a flat neck, and I just know that it won't really withstand chunky hits because there isn't enough room, and I know that it will buzz out on frets, and I either live with that or I raise the overall playing action, which is a bit of a sad outcome, and certainly for a customer's point of view it's not a great outcome because their guitar won't feel like anything's changed much. So, to put if you put some relief back into the neck, how do you measure it? Well, a simple way, you don't even have to have a capo, but you hold down the E string, press it against the first and the last fret, and you can just check and see if there's any gap between that spring right in the middle of the thing. It's about 8th fret or 9th fret. People choose different ones, whatever. But you're thinking about it, it's somewhere middle of the spread, and you could do it with your thumb. Is that the same distance again? Yeah, just about. So what you're looking for is there a gap? And if so, how much is it? Now, if you want to actually get down to measuring it, then stick a capo on the first fret and get your feeler gauge out. Again, you might want to put something heavy but not sharp. I don't have one right to hand, but let's say I use this camera and I stick camera on right there, just so I know it's pressing that fret without dragging it sideways, but I know it's pressing the fret onto the string, right? And now I've got freedom to first of all see if it rings. That's playing like a separate string between those two frets, and then I can use my spirit level feeler gauge to determine what the gap is. Now everybody has different settings. Every manufacturer will state a certain amount, and if you want to go and find what that is, you can go ahead and tweak and set until you've got that much. How much you tweak it will change depending on the gauge of strings. Heavier strings will cause more curvature, which means you may have to crank the counteract with the truss rod more to get it back to a lesser amount of gap down here. So if you want to go and find out those measurements, go ahead and chase them. I tend to do it by eye. I aim for about 0.1 to 0.2 maximum, and I do it by eye because I always gauge. I'm constantly measuring that distance at the first fret anyway when I'm setting the nut, so I'm pretty familiar with what it looks like. And basically it should be more of a matter of feel than it should be about measuring things with feeler gauges. So let's say you've agreed with me that you need some in there once you've done all your let's say you've done your fret leveling. You need some relief in there. You've set your action where you want it. Then you get on and play the thing and hit it hard and whatever. And if it plays nicely, you've got it right. It may play nicely, and you may still think, because of the curvature, you may find that's just a little bit higher the action in the middle than you'd like it, because you've set it quite low down the either end. Then remove a bit of the curvature in it and see what happens. If you start getting strings slapping the fingerboard or the frets, I should say, when you hit it, then you need to let there be some more curve in it. So I would totally recommend you do it by feel. And if you use numbers, the manufacturer numbers, just use them as a start point. Don't chase them as an end point, an absolute. And the reason I say that is it's far better that you pitch it somewhere wrong and then experiment in practice to find out what happens when you crank it one way or the other, and see and feel the differences. They're very, very subtle, but they're very powerful differences. It's better that you actually don't start with the exact right manufacturer's number. It's better that you start somewhere off the mark and go, that's still really high, or it's too high in the middle and it's not hitting any frets. Maybe I can take it back a bit. Experiment, and then actually what will happen is you'll find what works for you. And some people, as Marco clearly experienced, some people really prefer, for their own purposes, prefer a neck with no curve in it at all. There's no right or wrong. What it means is they may be playing lead guitar and actually not be hitting big ringing chords, or they may not have a very heavy style with it as they hit the chords. They may be much lighter, and be concerned perhaps only with playing lead in the higher register. But it's a personal thing, and you may not like it, and you may always have your guitar with quite a lot of curvature, so you can really hit those chords in the middle of the neck. So there you go. That's what I've learned about neck relief. There are some really bizarre things that I've heard. I've seen on forums, guitar forums local to me, on Facebook and other places, big community forums, where so-called experts come on and tell everybody that the truss rod's purpose is to adjust the playing action first and foremost, which is absolute nonsense. What's true is that if you crank the release the truss rod and allow the neck to bend more, that will, as it happens, increase the playing action in the center of the neck, in the center of the string length. So around about there. That is a byproduct of slacking off the truss rod, but it's not the means by which you change your action on the guitar. So a newcomer to a forum saying, I've got a high action and the guitar doesn't feel great to play. You need to be paying attention to the nut first fret action, or the nut slot heights, and the bridge action, and setting a small amount of relief. And if your guitar doesn't play then you've got a problem with your frets, which probably requires some degree of precision leveling to allow you to go down to a really nice playing action. And that's about the only way around it. The primary constraint that prohibits you having a nice low playing action is the inherent unevenness of the frets that come with all guitars, including the expensive ones, unless they've been through some sophisticated machine. And actually I've even found that doesn't seem to work out, but that's just a small sample, so I can't be sure about that. But adjusting the truss rod has a byproduct, a secondary effect of increasing or decreasing the playing action at the center of the string length or the scale length, but it's not a primary effect, and it's not the way by which you go after a decent playing action. You do that by adjusting the nut, or the first fret action by working on the nut, and the bridge saddle action. And of course, once you do those two, you then are kind of you come face to face with the limitations of the frets, and you either what normally happens is you either do what I do, which is to level them to make them comply with the action I've chosen, or if you aren't able to do that, you have to quit, and your playing action is dictated to you. The lowest possible playing action is dictated to you by the condition of the frets underneath. Okay, well, I hope the signal to noise ratio thing has probably worked out a little bit better than leaving the mics on the camera pick up all of that continually, which is there we go. And so that's just my version of a short video. Okay, so next thing on my list of things to do is to reassemble an old, beautiful old, much loved Telecaster, and to reunite it with its new neck, which is waiting. So I'll see you on another video.